Hello everyone, this is another video with Chess Teacher Tui. I'm adding on to my tactics videos, and I wanted to show a couple of very cool combinations from the fourth official world champion, Alexander Alekhine, also called Alekhine. Uh, Alekhine was a Russian grandmaster. He left Russia, which had just become the Soviet Union, in about 1921. He was the first Soviet champion. He was one of the top 5 finishers at the famous St. Petersburg tournament in 1914, sometimes called the Grandmaster Tournament, where 5 masters, Lasker, Capablanca, Tarrasch, Marshall, and Alekhine, were all called Grandmasters of chess. He became the 4th world champion when he defeated Jose Raul Capablanca in the year 1927, when he defeated him in South America, I believe in Buenos Aires. So he was an incredible champion. He lost the title briefly to Max Euwe in the 30s, and then won it back in the rematch, and stayed world champion through the Second World War. There were no serious matches during that time, and he was still world champion when he died in 1945. Alekhine was known for being an incredible tactician. The tactics I'm going to show you today are not nearly worthy of his genius, but they are still very, very cool. And I'm going to show you these 2 different examples of Alekhine tactics to show the kinds of tactics that are a little bit easier and harder to figure out. The first puzzle I have is from a position where a game between Alexander Alekhine played in New York 1924. And I looked at this position. This position is taken from the Manual of Chess Combinations, Volume B, and I didn't have a particularly difficult challenge solving this tactical puzzle, because I was able to understand the forced lines, and I was able to understand the basic pattern of the checkmate. Sometimes certain kinds of chess puzzles are easy if you know how to reverse engineer the puzzle, if you know what you're looking for. So in another puzzle from the Manual of Chess Combinations Volume 1, we have what I like to call a queen back rank mate. This is a different position, and this is a very simple position. This is a mate in 1. And in this mate in 1, very simply, the queen goes from g5 to d8. It's a back rank mate, but it's slightly different because the king does not have a flight square on e7, because he's being checkmated by a queen rather than a rook. I don't know if there's a specific name for this kind of checkmate. I just call it a queen back rank mate. But if anyone wants to tell me what this specific checkmate is called, please tell me in the comments section, and I would be happy to change the title of the video. So this is the kind of checkmate that I was actually looking for in this position, and it's because I was familiar with that kind of mate. I was familiar with the idea of the king on f8, the queen on g5 going to d8. Because I'm familiar with that basic pattern, this puzzle was much easier to solve. So I'm going to give you a little bit to try to figure out what you can see in this position. And when I tell you to try to solve it, please pause the video and you'll see if we can look at it correctly. A couple things to look at from this video. When you're looking at this position, we first want to ask, okay, what are our opponent's threats? Well, when we look at this position, we see number 1, it's white to move, and the queen is hanging. So if it were black's move, you would just play queen takes queen, and that would be the end of the game. Fairly simple. We know in this game that it seems that Alekhine is the one who is on the aggressive side. His pieces are much more directly placed at black's king. But as we can see, black is 2 pawns up, and black also has this very, very dangerous pass pawn on c4. So if, for example, queen were to take queen, which is not the advisable move in this position at all, then in this position it would seem that black should win easily because of that. So if we were to just turn on the computer for a moment, it gives black, well, it says draw, so I guess it's not as bad. It's interesting how this would be a draw then. I'm curious how this position looks like a draw. Oh, I see. So, and I guess if you come out, then it can be an interesting attack. But the point is that it at least throws away the win. And even though this position is called a draw by the computer, I would actually say that between humans, I would give a pretty heavy edge. I would give a pretty heavy edge to black. It's definite that he has an uphill struggle in that position. So, unfortunately, because I had the machine on there, it gave away the first move. We see also in this puzzle that black has a back rank weakness. And one of the great things about doing combinations is if we can figure out what would be a forced combination. So we want to see where everything is. So we have to realize that white is in trouble. He can't just exchange pieces or he'll lose, probably. We also see that black has a back rank weakness. And we also see that we have a forced continuation. If rook were to play rook to e8, the only move for black legally would be the knight to go to g8. So knowing that can help us to calculate even further. One of the things that we can realize is that if the knight moves, then the pawn, once the knight is no longer there, the knight moves to g8. The pawn is then pinned. It is in a pinned position, and then all of a sudden, the knight is in a different position. We see that the knight has two ways it can check the king. The knight could check on either e7 or h6, and both of those can be fairly critical in this position. So the key comes once the real critical move in this position, rook check, knight interposes, that's forced. The key move in the position is knight to h6. Now all of a sudden black has only two legal moves. The king can either move to h8, which would be folly because then rook takes knight checkmate, or since the pawn is pinned, queen takes h6. And this, of course, is a pick your poison scenario because as we saw in this earlier position, where we can have the easy checkmate, now that white has sacrificed the knight to clear the diagonal, exchange sacrifice the knight on g8, queen d8, checkmate. And as I said before, this was not a particularly difficult puzzle for me because I was familiar with the patterns and I could see some of the different things going on in the puzzle. The pinned pawn, clearing the way for the queen, the forced movement for the knight on the back rank. There were a lot of different thematic things going on that I was able to work out so that it wasn't a particularly difficult tactic. Now this tactic, which is also from Alekhine, this is a game against Mr. West in Portsmouth, 1923. This is one of those puzzles where I really did not solve it. I was looking for a long time, and like the earlier puzzle, this is a mate in four. But I would argue this is a much more difficult mate in four because it doesn't have those same kind of pattern recognition kinds of things for you to build on. The checkmate is going to look very, very unusual. So rather than making you go through it, I'll just show you the solution. The solution begins with queen h7 check. This is a queen sacrifice. The king has to take it because, just to show you what happens if the king doesn't take it, he can move to either h8, which is folly because then queen takes and then the king goes to one of these two squares. It doesn't really matter. And then the king gets mated. And if the king decides to go here instead, it is not a different story. He has to go back to one of these two squares, and then he gets mated there. So after queen takes 7, because mate is very, very quick other ways, king takes queen is the only real sensible move. And while Alekhine loves a good queen sacrifice, The real difficulty of this puzzle is it's not because unlike many tactical puzzles where you have a queen sack and then there's a logical follow up, this is a sacrifice followed up by yet another sacrifice. Rook takes g7, and now, because of it, rook takes rook is forced. And what Alekhine has done is he has cleared the f6 square for his knight, check. And because of this, the only move now that's legal is king to g6, which is followed by bishop h5, checkmate. This is an absolutely beautiful, beautiful puzzle, but it's not an easy puzzle to see because, again, it's not a common checkmate pattern. The king is held in by two of his own material. It's a bishop checkmate with a very kind of unusual dovetail situation because he's not able to flee because of the knight covering the h7 square and this knight covering the f5 square. So even though they're both made in fours, I would contend that this second Alekhine puzzle is much more difficult because it's a lot harder to rely on memory. It's a lot harder to reverse engineer. So in this one, I refer to this puzzle as kind of a pure tactic puzzle, meaning it's not one that can be worked out from pattern recognition. It's just pure calculation, pure board visualization, and a really stunning and beautiful, beautiful combination by Alekhine. I would imagine a lot of very strong players would have difficulty solving this puzzle immediately unless they have that kind of acumen to see how everything relates together. Most really good or easier to solve tactic puzzles rely on the kind of memory that we saw earlier and the more logical steps that we see in this earlier puzzle of Alekhine Freeman. So those are just two really good Alekhine tactics. I hope that you enjoyed this video. And to quote the great motto, I wish you good luck with your chess, and goodbye for now.